Okay, welcome to the Entrepreneurs and the Economy presentation lecture. Please make sure that you have your note guide handy with you, because as we go through this presentation lecture, we'll be going through some key concepts that you're probably going to want to jot down for understanding of entrepreneurs and the economy, and also to prepare yourself for your quiz. So let's see how entrepreneurs and the economy coexist to give us the economic structure that we have at this time. Before we do any of this, let's first define what economic basics are. So when it comes to economic basics, one of the things that you can do is you can ask yourself a simple question. And normally the answer to this will allow you to understand what economic basics are all about. So the question is, how many of you have purchased an item when it first came on the market and then weeks later saw the same item at a lower price? It's pretty common with a lot of products that are put on the market for us to purchase as consumers. When they are first introduced, demand is high, regardless of price. Therefore, we want to have them right away. Think of it in terms of some of our technological items that we purchase, video games, or cell phones, or personal devices. Those are items that, the longer that they are on the market, demand will decrease, therefore, price will also decrease. And we will analyze the relationship between price and demand a little bit later on in this presentation. All right, so entrepreneurs and the economy. One cannot exist without the other. Let's take a look at entrepreneurship. If we took a look at some key vocabulary terms that are going to relate to entrepreneurship, we first have to define what is an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur is a person who undertakes the creation, organization, and ownership of a business. So if you are a business owner, you are an entrepreneur. There's also this term called a venture. If you're an entrepreneur who is going to take on a business activity or take on a business opportunity, then you are basically looking into a venture or exploring a venture, which is new business that involves risk. Entrepreneurship is pretty much taking the entrepreneur and the venture and tying it up into one term. So this is the process of recognizing the opportunity, testing it, and gathering the resources necessary to go into business, which is a little bit different, but still also relates to the final term, which is entrepreneurial. Entrepreneurial simply states an individual acting like an entrepreneur. So if you're very entrepreneurial, chances are you have the skill set and the drive and the motivation and the understanding of opportunity to become an entrepreneur. Now, there's a couple different economic systems that we need to look at. When it comes to an economic system, we first have to define what is economics. Well, if we take a look at 4 fundamental questions, these are the questions that are presented and that need to be answered in order to establish an economic structure. So the first question is, what goods/services should be produced? How is that determined? It's determined through research and development. The market usually can determine to a producer what goods and services the market is looking for, therefore giving the producer some direction on what to create. Number 2 is what quantity of goods and services should be produced. This is analyzed by an economic indicator known as demand. What is the demand for a particular product? That will also give the producer guidance or direction on how much of this good and service should be produced. Question 3 is how should the goods and services be produced? This is going to impact strictly the producer, because the producer has to be able to produce goods and services that are affordable to the market who demand them, but then also be able to control his or her own costs when producing the product. So this is a delicate balance and probably one of the most important questions to have to answer when determining what is economics and establishing economic systems. And then finally, number 4, for whom should the goods and services be produced? So this is determining who wants it. Is there a market for the good and service? And will it be successful once it enters the market and becomes available for consumers to purchase? All right, so let's take a look at 2. Well, actually, let me go back to this next slide. the two types of markets that we are going to look at, or two types of economic systems, is a free market versus command. Let's take a look at a command system first. In a command economy, once again, the four fundamental questions are going to have to be asked and answered, but the key indicator here is right here. These four questions are answered by the government. The government decides according to the four fundamental economic questions, which is different from the free market, which is also known as a free enterprise system. So in a free enterprise system, all of the four economic questions are asked again, and this time it is decided by the people or by the consumers. So two different types of economic structures, the command economy and the market economy. One dominated by the government, the other dominated by the people. Profit and competition, these are the two big drivers when it comes to business. Profit, those of you who have taken accounting or are in accounting understand that profit is when revenues exceed expenses. However, that is not the only driver when it comes to a business's success. Obviously, it is a big indicator, but another one might be price, quality of product, service, and reputation. Those four sub-items, these four elements here, are going to relate directly to the competition. So competition and profit, two big drivers in business. Now, when it comes to different market structures, there are two very common market structures. One is a monopoly and one is an oligopoly. They are similar, but they are different. Let's take a look at their similarities and differences here in the next slide. Market structures, nature and degree of competition in an industry. So if we have a monopoly, we have only one seller. They take control over prices and they corner the market. They are discouraged in free market economies because no longer is it a free market because there's no choice. And then there's also some benefit to society. However, not always. How is that different or similar to an oligopoly? An oligopoly has few competing firms. It has some influence over prices, but not total control. It is also, just like a monopoly, discouraged in free market economies, and again, also like a monopoly, sometimes can benefit society. So what are some examples of monopolies versus oligopolies? Well, it's hard to find existing examples of monopolies right now because the government will step in and break up a monopoly if they feel like this particular monopoly is starting to corner the market. One of the most recent monopolies that was broken up was Microsoft, broken up by the government because it was considered that Microsoft was starting to dominate some of the software industry. An oligopoly is a little bit different because it doesn't have one seller. It has a few competing firms that are working against each other, but is also keeping intact the competitive nature, but there's only a few of them that are going to be competing at the highest of level. The best example for an oligopoly I can think of is probably the soft drink industry. Coke and Pepsi dominate, but there are also a couple of other sub companies that also compete in that industry. All right, let's take a look at some basic economic concepts. All right, these things are things that will indicate the strength or the strength or the struggles of a particular economy. Let's take a look at factors of production. These are resources business use to produce goods and services people want. If these are not in great supply, could impact the overall economic structure in terms of supply and demand and price. Demand is the quantity of goods, services consumers are willing to buy. So is there a high demand? Supply needs to match that. When it comes to demand can be influenced in a couple of different manners. Elastic demand means simply changing the price could change the demand. Raise the price, lower the demand. Lower the price, raise demand. Inelastic demand means that a change in price is going to have very little effect on demand. Think of gasoline. Whether or not we have to pay $4 or $2 a gallon, we are still going to have the same demand for gasoline. There's an example of a product that has inelastic demand. Then finally down here we have diminishing marginal utility. Price alone does not determine demand. So the price could change, not have an effect on demand. Other economic indicators, such as supply, could have an impact on demand, which we'll take a look at up here. Supply is the amount of goods or services producers are willing to supply. So producers want to meet demand to be able to explain or not contradict, but counteract their expenses for producing products. Equilibrium, which is the point at which consumers buy all of the products that is supplied, that is the magical point that all suppliers want to get to. And then there's also scarcity, when demand exceeds supply. So if there's more product out there than demand, we have a problem because there's not enough to fulfill that need. All right, let's take a look at this. This is a common economic chart analyzing supply and demand. So we take a look at the different items on this chart. What does the green line stand for? What does the blue line stand for? What does this point here stand for? And how does this all relate to the health of an economic structure? Let's take a look at that on the next slide. You can take a guess as to what some of these lines mean and also the point in the middle of the graph. But if you're not quite sure, we have the green line indicating demand. So we have higher prices, possibly meaning lower demand. So the higher quantity could also mean lower demand too. So price and quantity are going to impact demand. Price and quantity are also going to impact supply. So if we can find that equilibrium point where supply meets demand, that means that we are going to be as profitable as possible. Indicators in business cycles. Let's take a look at federal and government statistics. Over here on the right, this graph indicates a business cycle. Once a product gets put on the market, there is a growth phase. It will then peak out, then begin to recess, and then it'll end up becoming into a depression. And then the cycle will continue to repeat. The thought process here, if you are a business owner, is to reduce the peaks and valleys. If you can do that, you're going to have a much steadier flow of business and be able to provide products that meet demand and be as profitable as possible. Economic indicators of the business cycle include the unemployment rate, which is the amount of people who are not working, the consumer confidence. Do consumers have confidence in particular products? What might be keeping them from being confident in the product? And then finally, the overall economic indicator of an economic system within the United States is the GDP, or the gross domestic product. Entrepreneurial contributions. What do entrepreneurs contribute to our economy? We already know from the beginning of this presentation that economy and entrepreneurs cannot exist alone. They have to coexist. They work off of each other. So the answer to that question is that they are the driving force of economic growth. Entrepreneurs recognize a want and satisfy them. They spend money stimulating the economy. They provide jobs, decreasing the unemployment rate. They change society by having an impact on local communities. And they also create even more wants to be satisfied. So meeting the needs of consumers in one area could create a need in another area, thus creating an opportunity for another entrepreneur to be able to have success and fill that need. So entrepreneurs and the economy, they must coexist, they act together, they drive the economic system that we enjoy today. So there you have it. There it is, the front page of Entrepreneurs and the Economy and all of the pieces of the puzzle and how they fit together. Please feel free to review this presentation if needed. And if you have to, go back to fill out some of the areas of the note guide. Great study tool for your quiz, and also putting the link together between the entrepreneur and the economy. All right, that concludes this presentation lecture, so I will see you in our next class period.